Cowboy found starving, old black woman and her beautiful daughter, hiding in his barn. The lantern trembles in the giant cowboy's grip as two pairs of desperate eyes stare back from the shadows. The townsfolk call him weak, too soft for frontier survival. They whisper he'll lose everything within months. Another gentle soul crushed by the unforgiving West. That's when fate delivers the trembling old woman and her fierce daughter to his doorstep. Refugees carrying secrets that could destroy them all. The giant's kindness has always been his curse, but these strangers hold the key to a legacy that will either elevate him beyond his wildest dreams or bury him beneath the weight of a community's hatred. Their past and his future are more connected than any of them realize, bound by forces set in motion long before this moment. Will protecting them prove his ultimate salvation or final downfall? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. Samuel McKinnon wiped the sweat from his brow as another stalk of corn crumbled in his hands. The drought had claimed half his crop, and what remained looked more like kindling than food. His modest ranch outside Cedar Ridge had seen better days, much better days. The morning sun beat down mercilessly as Samuel surveyed his failing fields. Bills stacked high on his kitchen table, and the banknote would come due soon, very soon. Heavy footsteps approached from behind. Samuel turned to see Thaddeus Grimm riding up on his black stallion, a cruel smile playing across his weathered face. "Morning, Samuel." Grimm's voice carried the weight of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Crops looking mighty poor this season." Samuel straightened his shoulders. "They'll recover." "Will they?" Grimm dismounted slowly, deliberately. "Word around town is you're having trouble making payments. Shame to see good land go to waste." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Grimm had been circling Samuel's property for months, waiting for weakness to show. Today, it showed plenty. "Land's not for sale, Thaddeus." Grimm chuckled. "Everything's for sale, boy. Just a matter of timing." He mounted his horse again. "Think on it. Won't get a better offer." The dust cloud from Grimm's departure settled slowly. Samuel clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. The vultures were already circling. That afternoon, Samuel rode into Cedar Ridge for supplies he could barely afford. The general store buzzed with conversation that died the moment he entered. Whispers followed him down every aisle. "Too soft for his own good," muttered old Pete from behind a stack of flour bags. "Won't last another winter," agreed Martha, the shopkeeper's wife. "Mark my words." They called him the gentle giant behind his back, and it wasn't meant as a compliment. In a land where quick fists and quicker guns settled disputes, Samuel's kindness looked like weakness, fatal weakness. Sheriff Morrison approached as Samuel loaded his meager purchases. "Samuel, need to warn you about something. Been reports of strangers in the area, folks passing through who might not have the best intentions." "What kind of strangers?" "The kind that cause trouble for folks who help them." Morrison's eyes held a warning. "Best to keep your doors locked and your business to yourself." Samuel nodded but said nothing. The sheriff meant well, but his definition of trouble often included anyone who didn't look like the people already living in Cedar Ridge. The ride home felt longer than usual. Samuel's mind churned over his problems like a mill grinding grain. No money, no crops, no prospects. The townspeople were probably right. He wouldn't survive another season. As evening approached, Samuel tended to his remaining livestock. The barn felt too quiet, too empty. He'd sold most of his cattle months ago just to keep food on the table. Now only 3 cows and his horse remained. Something felt different tonight. Wrong. Samuel grabbed his lantern and pushed open the barn door. The hinges creaked like old bones. He stepped inside, raising the light to survey the familiar space. The hay bales had been disturbed. Someone had moved them recently. Food scraps littered the floor near the back corner, and fresh footprints marked the dirt. "Hello?" Samuel called softly. Silence answered back. He moved deeper into the barn, lantern held high, his heart hammered against his ribs. Sheriff Morrison's warnings echoed in his mind. A soft rustling came from behind the largest haystack. Samuel froze, listening. There it was again, like fabric brushing against straw. He rounded the corner and stopped dead. Two figures huddled in the shadows, pressed against the barn wall like trapped animals. An elderly woman and a younger one, both wrapped in tattered shawls that had once been colorful. Their dark skin showed the toll of hard travel and harder times. Their eyes reflected the lantern light with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. The older woman stepped protectively in front of the younger one. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracked from thirst. "We mean no harm." Samuel's lantern trembled slightly. The women looked half-starved, hollow-cheeked, and weak. They'd been hiding here for days, surviving on scraps and rainwater. "When did you arrive?" Samuel asked gently. 3 nights passed. The old woman's dignity remained intact despite her circumstances. "We'll move on if you wish. Just needed rest." The younger woman said nothing, but her eyes never left Samuel's face. She was beautiful despite her exhaustion, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Her silence spoke of caution learned through bitter experience. Samuel lowered his lantern. These were the strangers Sheriff Morrison had warned about, the kind that brought trouble to those who helped them. In Cedar Ridge, showing kindness to the wrong people could cost a man everything. His reputation for being too soft had already marked him as weak. Helping runaway slaves would destroy what little standing he had left. Grim would use it against him. The townspeople would turn completely. The sheriff might look the other way, or worse. But looking at these women, Samuel saw something that reminded him why he'd never fit in with Cedar Ridge's harder men. They needed help, and he had the power to give it or withhold it. The decision would define everything that came after. Samuel set the lantern on a wooden crate and stepped back slowly. "You're safe here. Both of you." The older woman's shoulders sagged with relief. "Bless you, sir. We've met too many who weren't so kind. I'm Samuel. This is my land." He studied their faces in the flickering light. "What are your names?" "I'm Eudora," the older woman replied. "This is my daughter, Miriam." Miriam nodded but remained silent. Her eyes tracked Samuel's every movement, ready to run at the first sign of danger. Samuel moved toward the barn door. "I'll bring food and water, real food, not scraps." He returned 20 minutes later with a basket full of bread, dried meat, and cheese. 2 mason jars of fresh water completed the offering. Eudora accepted gratefully, but Miriam hesitated before taking her share. "We're traveling north," Eudora explained between careful bites, "seeking family in Canada." Samuel understood without further explanation. The Underground Railroad had routes that passed near Cedar Ridge, though most townspeople pretended not to know about them. "How long since you've eaten properly?" Samuel asked. 4 days, Eudora admitted. "Maybe 5. Time blurs when you're hiding." Samuel's jaw tightened. No one should suffer such hunger while he had food to spare. Over the next week, Samuel brought meals twice daily to the barn. Eudora's strength returned gradually, but she developed a persistent cough that worried him. Miriam remained wary, though she began helping with small tasks around the barn. The arrangement couldn't last forever. Sheriff Morrison had started asking pointed questions about Samuel's frequent trips to the barn. Grimm's men had been spotted riding the property lines, looking for weaknesses to exploit. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning when a stranger in a black suit arrived at Samuel's door. "Mr. McKinnon, I'm Attorney Harrison from Denver. I have urgent business regarding your Uncle Jeremiah." Samuel frowned. "Uncle Jeremiah? Haven't spoken to him in 15 years. "I'm afraid he passed 3 months ago, sir. I've been searching for you ever since." The lawyer opened his leather satchel and withdrew a thick envelope. "Your uncle left you everything. The Rocking J Ranch, 50,000 head of cattle, and considerable holdings in Denver." Samuel's legs nearly gave out. "That's impossible. Jeremiah hated my father. Hated our whole family. Perhaps. But he admired you, Mr. McKinnon." Harrison produced a letter written in familiar handwriting. He had investigators watching you for years. Every act of kindness, every time you helped someone in need. He called you the only family member with an uncommon decency. Samuel read his uncle's letter with shaking hands. The old man had documented everything. The time Samuel had given his last dollar to a widow facing eviction. The winter he'd shared his food with a family of strangers. The countless small mercies that had marked him as weak in Cedar Ridge had marked him as worthy in his uncle's eyes. "The Rocking J is the largest spread in 3 territories," Harrison continued. "You're now one of the wealthiest men in Montana." The news hit Samuel like a physical blow. Yesterday, he'd been facing bankruptcy. Today, he commanded more resources than Grimm ever dreamed of possessing. "There's one condition," Harrison added. "Your uncle specified that your inheritance depends on your continued character. Should you abandon your principles for profit, the estate reverts to charity." Samuel nodded slowly. Uncle Jeremiah had known him better than he'd known himself. After the lawyer departed, Samuel sat alone in his kitchen, staring at the legal documents that had transformed his life. The irony wasn't lost on him. His greatest weakness had become his greatest strength, but with great power came great responsibility. Eudora and Miriam were still hiding in his barn, still vulnerable to discovery and capture. Now he had the means to protect them properly. Samuel walked to the barn that evening with a different stride. The gentle giant had become something else entirely, though his heart remained unchanged. "Eudora, Miriam, I need to tell you something." Both women looked up from their simple meal. Eudora's cough had worsened despite the regular food and shelter. "My circumstances have changed dramatically today." Samuel chose his words carefully. "I've inherited significant property and resources, enough to ensure your safety and passage north." Eudora's eyes sharpened. What kind of inheritance? "A cattle ranch, a large one, with enough influence to discourage certain kinds of trouble." "Influence can be a dangerous thing," Eudora said slowly, "especially for those who aren't born to it." Samuel realized she was offering wisdom, not just conversation. This woman had survived things he could barely imagine. Her knowledge of navigating treacherous social waters far exceeded his own. "I could use guidance," he admitted. "People are going to see me differently now. Not all of them kindly." Eudora smiled for the first time since he'd found them. "Child, I've been reading people's true intentions my whole life. Had to, for survival. Your heart hasn't changed with your fortune, and that's rare." Miriam finally spoke. "What will you do with such power?" "Use it to help people like you. People who need protection and can't find it elsewhere." Something shifted in Miriam's expression. The wariness remained, but hope flickered alongside it. "Grimm won't take kindly to your rise," Eudora warned. "Men like him hate seeing others elevated, especially those they've marked as weak." "Let him try something," Samuel replied. "The game just changed completely." Eudora coughed violently, doubling over with the force of it. When she straightened, Samuel saw blood on her lips. Time was running short, and the stakes had just gotten infinitely higher. The next morning brought Dr. Patterson to examine Eudora's worsening condition. Samuel had ridden into town before dawn, using his newfound influence to summon the best medical care available. "Consumption," the doctor diagnosed grimly. "Advanced stage. Rest and good food might slow it, but the damage is extensive." Samuel's heart sank as he watched Eudora process the news with quiet dignity. She'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed brought a shadow to her eyes. "How long?" she asked simply. "Months, perhaps less. I'm sorry." After the doctor departed, Eudora sat Samuel down in the barn. "We need to discuss practical matters. Miriam's future depends on decisions made now." Samuel nodded, recognizing the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "She's stronger than she appears," Eudora continued. "Taught her letters and numbers when such things were forbidden. She understands business better than most men twice her age." This surprised Samuel. Miriam's silence had hidden remarkable intelligence. "Why tell me this?" he asked. "Because you'll need her wisdom as much as she needs your protection." Eudora's eyes held depths of experience Samuel couldn't fathom. "Your uncle's fortune won't manage itself, and enemies will emerge from every shadow. As if summoned by her words, hoofbeats thundered outside. Samuel peered through a gap in the barn wall to see Sheriff Morrison approaching with 3 other men. Grim rode among them, his face twisted with barely contained fury. "Stay hidden," Samuel whispered to the women before stepping outside. "Samuel," Morrison called out, "need to have a word." "What about, Sheriff?" Grim spurred his horse forward. "About your sudden good fortune and the strange coincidences that followed." Samuel kept his expression neutral. "Not sure what you mean, Thaddeus." "Funny how a man goes from broke to wealthy overnight. Makes people wonder about his methods." Grim's implication hung heavy in the air. "My inheritance is legal and documented. Attorney Harrison filed all necessary papers with the territorial government." Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "That's not really why we're here, Samuel. Some folks are concerned about your household arrangements." "My household is my business." "Not when it affects the community's moral standards," Grim interjected. "A man of your new position has responsibilities to set proper examples." Samuel's hands clenched into fists. The real attack had begun. Grim couldn't challenge his inheritance directly, so he'd strike at his character instead. "I'm not aware of any improper conduct on my property." "Then you won't mind if we search your barn," Grim suggested with a cold smile. The moment stretched like a taut rope ready to snap. Samuel's mind raced through possibilities, but each path led to disaster. If they found Eudora and Miriam, his protection would crumble. If he refused the search, suspicion would harden into certainty. "Actually, gentlemen, I think we can resolve this more civilized fashion." All heads turned toward the barn as Eudora emerged, walking with regal dignity despite her illness. She'd wrapped herself in a clean shawl and held her head high, every inch the lady of quality. Miriam followed a step behind, equally composed but watchful. "I am Eudora Washington," she announced in clear, educated tones. "Mr. McKinnon kindly offered shelter when my daughter and I found ourselves stranded during our journey." Grim's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. He'd expected to find criminals or evidence of wrongdoing, not 2 women who carried themselves with obvious refinement. "Stranded how?" Morrison asked more gently. "Stagecoach breakdown 20 miles south. The driver abandoned us when repairs proved impossible." Eudora's lie flowed smoothly, backed by absolute conviction. "We walked for 2 days before finding Mr. McKinnon's property." Samuel marveled at her quick thinking. The story explained their presence while casting him as a good Samaritan rather than a criminal. "Where were you traveling?" Grim demanded, still searching for weakness. "Denver, to visit family. My late husband left property there requiring attention." Eudora produced papers from her shawl, documents Samuel had never seen before. All quite legal and proper, I assure you. Morrison examined the papers briefly. They appeared authentic, though Samuel suspected Eudora possessed skills beyond his imagination. "Well," the sheriff said finally, "seems like a charitable act, not a criminal one." Grim's face reddened. "This isn't over, McKinnon." "No, I don't suppose it is." Samuel stepped closer to Grim's horse. "But next time you come to my property making accusations, bring proof or don't come at all." The wealth had changed something fundamental in Samuel's bearing. The townspeople noticed it immediately. Where once they'd seen weakness, now they recognized authority, backed by substantial resources. After the men departed, Samuel turned to Eudora with newfound respect. "Those papers were remarkable forgeries." "Who says they were forgeries?" Eudora smiled mysteriously. "I've had many lives, Samuel. Not all of them involved running." Over the following weeks, their unusual household found its rhythm. Eudora advised Samuel on managing his inheritance while her health slowly declined. Miriam worked alongside him, her intelligence becoming apparent through countless small interactions. Samuel discovered Miriam could calculate cattle prices faster than most accountants. She understood land management, crop rotation, and seasonal planning with intuitive precision. Her formal education might have been limited, but her practical knowledge was extraordinary. More importantly, Samuel found himself drawn to her quiet strength and subtle humor. Their conversations, initially cautious, grew warmer as trust developed between them. "She's falling in love with you," Eudora observed one evening. Samuel's face flushed. "I wouldn't presume such a thing. And you with her, though you're both too stubborn to admit it." Eudora coughed, the sound rougher than before. "Good. Love built on respect lasts longer than passion built on nothing." Samuel realized Eudora was orchestrating more than just his business education. She was preparing for a future she wouldn't live to see. October brought the first frost and a noticeable decline in Eudora's condition. Her cough had deepened into painful spasms that left her breathless and weak. Dr. Patterson's visits became more frequent, though his medicines provided little relief. Samuel moved the women into the main house, converting his parlor into a comfortable room for Eudora. The barn had served its purpose, but dignity demanded better accommodations for her final days. "People will talk," Miriam warned as they arranged furniture. "Let them talk," Samuel replied. "You're family now." The word hung in the air between them, carrying weight neither had expected. Family. It felt right, despite the unconventional circumstances that had brought them together. Eudora spent her stronger moments teaching Samuel the finer points of business management. Her knowledge seemed impossibly broad for someone who'd supposedly lived in servitude. "How do you know so much about mining investments?" Samuel asked one afternoon, reviewing documents from his uncle's estate. Eudora's eyes grew distant. "Your uncle wasn't the only man I advised over the years. Survival sometimes requires becoming indispensable." She refused to elaborate, but Samuel sensed layers of history he couldn't begin to imagine. This woman had lived multiple lives, each one requiring different skills and identities. Miriam proved equally mysterious in her own way. She could read market reports faster than Samuel could scan them, spotting trends and opportunities with uncanny accuracy. Her mathematical abilities bordered on the supernatural. "Where did you learn to calculate compound interest in your head?" Samuel asked after watching her solve a complex problem without paper. "Mama taught me. Said numbers were freedom because they couldn't be taken away or forgotten." The simple answer revealed volumes about their past struggles and Eudora's determination to arm her daughter with invisible weapons. As November approached, Grimm's harassment intensified. He couldn't attack Samuel's inheritance directly, but he found other ways to apply pressure. Property tax assessments mysteriously doubled. New regulations suddenly applied to large ranches. Building permits faced unexpected delays. Samuel weathered each assault with growing confidence. His uncle's wealth provided buffers against most forms of bureaucratic warfare. More importantly, Eudora's coaching had sharpened his political instincts considerably. "He's getting desperate," Eudora observed after news reached them of Grimm's latest scheme. "Desperate men make fatal mistakes." Samuel hoped she was right, but Grimm's desperation worried him. Desperate men also abandoned rules and conventions when subtlety failed. The crisis came on a gray Thursday morning in late November. Eudora had suffered a particularly bad night, and Dr. Patterson's expression after examining her told Samuel everything he needed to know. "Days, not weeks," the doctor confirmed quietly. "Keep her comfortable. There's nothing more medical science can do." Samuel found Miriam sitting beside her mother's bed, holding Eudora's thin hand. Tears streaked down her face, though she made no sound. "We need to talk," Eudora whispered when she saw Samuel. "All three of us. Important things that can't wait." Samuel pulled up a chair and prepared for whatever revelation was coming. He'd learned to expect surprises from Eudora, but her next words still staggered him. "Your Uncle Jeremiah was my first owner, before the war, before everything changed." The room went completely silent except for the clock's steady ticking. "I was 16 when he bought me in New Orleans. Smartest purchase he ever made, though he didn't realize it at the time." Eudora's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "I had a gift for seeing patterns in numbers, in land, in people. Jeremiah was clever enough to use that gift instead of wasting it." Samuel's mind reeled. His inheritance suddenly took on entirely different dimensions. "Every mining claim, every business investment, every piece of property your uncle acquired, I helped him evaluate. My recommendations made him wealthy beyond his dreams. Eudora coughed, but pressed on. When the war ended, he offered me freedom and a percentage of profits. I took freedom, but refused the money. Too dangerous for someone like me to be visibly wealthy. Miriam squeezed her mother's hand, clearly hearing some of this history for the first time. But he never forgot the debt he owed me. Watching you, approving of your character, leaving you everything, that was his way of paying what he couldn't pay me directly. Samuel struggled to process the implications. So the inheritance was partly meant for you. For us. For Miriam's future. He knew I'd find you eventually. Knew my daughter would need protection and opportunity. Eudora smiled weakly. Clever man, your uncle. Even in death, he's still orchestrating justice. The revelation recontextualized everything Samuel thought he understood about his situation. He wasn't just a lucky heir. He was the instrument of a long-delayed moral accounting. There's more. Eudora reached under her pillow and withdrew a leather pouch. Maps and documents showing where the real wealth is hidden. Your uncle's official estate was just the visible portion. The rest requires my knowledge to unlock. Samuel stared at the pouch as if it contained dynamite. In many ways, it did. Why tell me this now? He asked. Because Grimm suspects something. His questions are getting more specific, more dangerous. If something happens to me before I can pass this knowledge on properly, it dies with me. Eudora pressed the pouch into Samuel's hands. Promise me you'll use this wisely, not just for profit, but for justice. There are others like us who need what only wealth and power can provide. Samuel nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of responsibility she was placing on his shoulders. And promise me you'll marry my daughter, not from duty, but because I see how you look at each other when you think nobody's watching. Heat flooded Samuel's cheeks, but he didn't deny the accusation. Miriam blushed deeply, but met his eyes steadily. Only if that's what we both want, she said softly. The conversation was interrupted by urgent knocking at the front door. Samuel looked out to see riders approaching fast. Grimm led them, and his face promised trouble of the worst kind. Samuel tucked the leather pouch inside his coat and moved to the front door. 6 men sat mounted outside, their faces grim with purpose. Sheriff Morrison rode among them, looking uncomfortable but determined. Samuel McKinnon, called a thin man in a black suit Samuel didn't recognize. I'm Judge Whitmore from the Territorial Court. We have legal business to discuss. Samuel stepped onto his porch, keeping his expression neutral. What kind of business, Judge? Questions have been raised about your fitness to inherit the Jeremiah McKinnon estate. Serious questions that require immediate investigation. Grimm's smile was pure venom. Told you this wasn't over, Samuel. What specific charges are being made? Samuel asked. Judge Whitmore unfolded a document with theatrical precision. Moral corruption, fraudulent identity claims, and conspiracy to defraud the territorial government. Mr. Grimm has provided substantial evidence of your unsuitability. Samuel's blood ran cold. Grimm had found a corrupt judge willing to steal his inheritance through legal manipulation. I demand to see this evidence. All in good time. First, we need to search your property for proof of the allegations. Whitmore's eyes glittered with avarice. Any resistance will be noted in my report. Samuel knew he had no choice. Refusing would only strengthen their case against him. Search whatever you want. You'll find nothing illegal. The men dismounted and began ransacking his home with methodical thoroughness. They overturned furniture, emptied drawers, and scattered papers across every room. Samuel watched helplessly as they violated his sanctuary. Judge Whitmore entered Eudora's room with particular interest. She lay propped against pillows, her breathing labored, but her eyes sharp as knife blades. So you're the mysterious house guest causing all this trouble, Whitmore sneered. I'm a dying woman seeking comfort in her final days, Eudora replied with quiet dignity. Nothing more threatening than that. We'll see about that. Whitmore began searching through her few belongings with rough hands. Miriam stood protectively near her mother's bed, radiating controlled fury. Samuel admired her restraint. He wanted to throw these invaders out physically, but violence would only serve their purposes. "Judge, perhaps we could conduct this investigation with more consideration for the lady's condition," Samuel suggested. "The lady?" Whitmore laughed harshly. "Mr. Grimm tells me she's nothing but a runaway vagrant you're harboring illegally." Eudora's eyes flashed dangerously. "Mr. Grimm knows nothing about my circumstances or my legal status." "Then you won't mind proving your identity with proper documentation." This was the moment Samuel had dreaded. Eudora's forged papers might fool a casual inspection, but sustained legal scrutiny would expose their deception. Eudora reached slowly into her bedside table and withdrew a different set of documents. These looked older, more official than anything Samuel had seen before. Eudora Washington, free woman of New Orleans, Louisiana. Manumission papers signed by Jeremiah McKinnon in 1863. Property deeds for land in Colorado Territory. Bank statements from Denver First National. She handed each document to the stunned judge. Samuel's jaw dropped. These weren't forgeries. They were genuine legal papers establishing Eudora as a legitimate property owner and free citizen. Whitmore examined the documents with growing confusion. "These appear authentic." "Because they are authentic," Eudora said calmly. "Your Mr. Grimm assumed I was a criminal because of my circumstances. He was wrong." Grimm pushed forward, his face red with rage. "This is impossible. You can't just produce papers from nowhere." "I didn't produce them from nowhere. I've carried them for 20 years, waiting for the day I might need to prove my legitimacy to small-minded men." The revelation stunned everyone in the room. Eudora wasn't just a runaway slave or a clever fugitive. She was a legitimate landowner with legal standing in territorial courts. "Furthermore," Eudora continued, "I have business relationships with several banks and mining companies that can verify my identity. My reputation in certain circles is quite solid." Judge Whitmore's confidence evaporated visibly. He'd expected to find evidence of fraud, but instead discovered a dying woman with impeccable legal credentials. "The inheritance question remains," Grimm said desperately. "Samuel's still unfit to manage such wealth." "Based on what evidence?" Samuel challenged. "Providing shelter to a legal traveler? Showing Christian charity to someone in need?" Whitmore shuffled the papers uncertainly. His corruption had limits, and those limits apparently stopped short of stealing from someone who could prove their innocence in higher courts. "Mr. Grimm, your allegations appear to be without merit. These people have committed no crimes." "They're lying," Grimm shouted. "No woman like her owns property legally." Eudora smiled with quiet satisfaction. "Would you like me to wire my banks for verification? I assure you, my accounts are quite substantial." The fight went out of Judge Whitmore completely. He'd been promised easy money for a simple fraud, but this had become legally complicated beyond his comfort level. "I'm dismissing all charges," he announced hastily. "Mr. McKinnon's inheritance stands as originally determined." Grimm's face went through several shades of purple before settling on dangerous white. "This isn't finished, Samuel. Not by a long shot." "Yes, it is." Samuel's voice carried new authority, backed by proven legitimacy and inherited power. "Any further harassment will be met with lawsuits for defamation and conspiracy. I have resources now, Thaddeus. More than enough to bury you in legal proceedings." After the men departed, Samuel turned to Eudora with amazement. "How long have you been planning this moment?" "Since the day Jeremiah freed me and insisted I take those property deeds. He said someday I'd need proof that couldn't be questioned or denied." Eudora coughed weakly. "Smart man, your uncle. He understood how the world works." Miriam helped her mother settle back into bed. "Why didn't you tell us about the Colorado property?" "Because it was never about me owning things. It was about being able to protect what matters when the moment came." Eudora looked at Samuel meaningfully. That moment just passed. Samuel realized Eudora had been 3 steps ahead of everyone, including him, from the very beginning. She'd orchestrated their salvation with the patience and precision of a master strategist. But even master strategists couldn't defeat consumption. Eudora's final victory had cost her remaining strength, and Samuel could see death approaching in her eyes. Eudora passed peacefully 3 days later, with Samuel and Miriam holding her hands as the morning sun streamed through the bedroom window. Her final words were a whispered blessing for their future together. They buried her beneath the cottonwood tree where she'd loved to sit during her stronger days. The entire ceremony was attended by only Samuel, Miriam, and Dr. Patterson, who'd grown to respect the remarkable woman during her final weeks. "She was extraordinary," the doctor said softly, as they stood by the fresh grave. "I've never met anyone who faced death with such grace and wisdom." Samuel nodded, unable to speak around the tightness in his throat. Eudora had been far more than a refugee seeking shelter. She'd been a teacher, strategist, and surrogate mother, all wrapped into one formidable package. Miriam remained silent throughout the service, her grief too deep for words. Samuel respected her need for solitude, while staying close enough to offer comfort when she was ready to accept it. The weeks following Eudora's death brought unexpected changes to Cedar Ridge. Word of her legal victory over Grimm and Judge Whitmore had spread throughout the territory, along with stories of her remarkable intelligence and dignity. Samuel received visits from businessmen who'd known Eudora during her Colorado days. They spoke of her with genuine respect and offered condolences on the loss of such a valuable advisor. These conversations revealed the true extent of her influence and connections. "She helped design the irrigation system that saved our mining operation," explained one visitor. "Brilliant woman. Her recommendations made us all wealthy." Samuel began to understand that Eudora's network of allies extended far beyond anything he'd imagined. She'd spent 20 years building relationships and earning respect in circles where such things seemed impossible. Miriam slowly emerged from her grief with renewed purpose. She threw herself into managing Samuel's expanding business interests, applying lessons learned at her mother's side. Her natural abilities, enhanced by Eudora's training, made her invaluable. "The cattle prices in Denver are about to shift," she announced one morning over breakfast. "We should sell half the herd before winter and buy back in spring." Samuel had learned to trust her instincts completely. Every prediction she'd made so far had proven accurate, sometimes with startling precision. Their partnership evolved naturally into something deeper, working side by side every day, sharing meals and conversations. They discovered compatibility that transcended their unusual circumstances. Respect grew into affection, then into something stronger. One evening in late December, as they reviewed account books by lamplight, Samuel realized he couldn't imagine life without Miriam's presence. She'd become essential to his happiness in ways that had nothing to do with business or convenience. "Miriam," he said quietly, setting down his pen, "I need to tell you something." She looked up from her calculations, her intelligent eyes reflecting the warm lamplight. "When your mother asked me to care for you, I thought she meant protection and support. I understand now, she meant something much deeper." Samuel reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small wooden box he'd been carrying for weeks. Inside lay a simple gold ring he'd crafted himself in the ranch workshop. "I'm not offering this because of any promise I made. I'm offering it because you've become the most important person in my world. Will you marry me?" Miriam's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "Yes, Samuel. Not because Mama wished it, but because I love you more than I thought possible." The ring fit perfectly, as if meant for her finger. They sealed their engagement with a gentle kiss that held all the tenderness of shared grief and shared hope. Their wedding took place in early spring beneath the cottonwood tree where Eudora rested. Dr. Patterson performed the ceremony, joined by several of Eudora's business associates who'd traveled from Denver for the occasion. The celebration was simple, but meaningful. Samuel had learned that the most important things in life required no grand gestures, only genuine commitment and daily kindness. Word of their marriage reached Grimm, who'd retreated into sullen isolation after his legal defeat. Some townspeople remained hostile, but most had come to respect Samuel's proven integrity and success. Money talked loudly in frontier communities, and Samuel's wealth spoke volumes about his capability. More importantly, Samuel and Miriam's obvious happiness together challenged assumptions about relationships across racial lines. Their partnership demonstrated that love based on mutual respect and shared values could overcome social prejudices. 6 months after their wedding, the McKinnon Ranch had become the most successful operation in 3 territories. Samuel's inherited wealth, combined with Miriam's business acumen and Eudora's hidden knowledge, created prosperity beyond anything the region had seen. They employed workers of all backgrounds, paying fair wages and providing decent housing. The ranch became a symbol of what frontier communities could achieve when old prejudices gave way to practical cooperation. Samuel often stood on his front porch at sunset, marveling at the transformation his life had undergone. The man who'd once been dismissed as too gentle for frontier life now commanded respect throughout Montana Territory. But the greatest change wasn't in his circumstances. It was in his understanding of strength itself. True power didn't come from cruelty or domination. It came from the courage to show kindness when kindness seemed impossible. Miriam joined him on the porch, slipping her hand into his as they watched the sun sink behind distant mountains. In her other hand, she held a letter from a family seeking safe passage north. "More travelers needing help," she said simply. Samuel smiled and squeezed her hand. "Then we'll help them. That's who we are." Together, they'd built something remarkable from the ashes of their separate struggles. Under the vast prairie sky, surrounded by the prosperity that principled love had created, they represented hope for a frontier where justice and kindness might finally triumph over fear and hatred. The gentle giant had found his strength, and it was gentleness itself.